Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture series on Indian polity. In the previous lecture, we have completed our discussion on part 1 of the Regulating Act of 1773. So the chapter 1, which is titled as Regulating Act of 1773 and the Aftermath. So I have said that this chapter 1 is going to be covered under 2 or 3 parts. So yesterday we have completed the part 1. So today lecture 2, which is related to part 2 of the Regulating Act of 1773. If possible, we will cover all the 5 sections today itself. If not, the last 3 sections 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 will be covered as a part 3. So volume 1, unit 1, chapter 1. So chapter 1 is going to be covered under 7 different sections. The first section and the second section, those are completed in part 1, and now we are going to delve into the third section, that is salient features of the Regulating Act of 1773. What are the provisions that were included by the British Parliament to regulate the activities of the East India Company through 1773 Act? So we are going to look into that. Right. The salient features of the Regulating Act of 1773, I have enlisted them under 6 different points. Just go through them. A detailed discussion on each of these salient provision will be discussed. The first one being creation of the post of Governor General of Bengal. Creation of the post of Governor General of Bengal. So earlier there was a post of Governor of Bengal, with the nomenclature was changed to Governor General of Bengal. And what are the newly added powers to this position? We will be discussing that. Second one being establishment of Executive Council. Here we will be knowing what is the Executive Council, what are the functions of the Executive Council, and how many members are there in the Executive Council. Right. The third one being parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. Parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. Right. So earlier we have seen, while we are discussing the third major reason for bringing out Regulating Act of 1773, that is the changing nature of East India Company from a purely trading body to a semi-governing or semi-sovereign political body. So when the nature of the functions were changed from commercial towards political, but the East India Company officials were not experienced, but they lack the expertise or experience in managing law and order, in managing the judicial functions. Because of such reasons, there was abuse of power. There was abuse of power by the East India Company officials. This abuse of power was mainly due to the lack of oversight mechanism from the top echelon. So there was no oversight mechanism from the British Parliament. Because of such reason, abuse of power was there in the East India Company officials, among the East India Company officials. So the British Parliament identified this, and it instituted parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. So in what way actually it was instituted, we are going to discuss that in a detailed manner. Right. Fixing maximum annual dividend to the shareholders of the East India Company. Fixing maximum annual dividend to the shareholders of the East India Company. So in the introduction lecture, I have said that East India Company is a kind of corporate entity. So the shareholders who brought the shares from the East India Company, they get dividend per annum, dividend annually, right? So the British Parliament has put a limit or put a ceiling on the maximum annual dividend to the shareholders. So why such a kind of limit was there? Why the British Parliament has put a maximum limit on the shareholders' dividend? So we are going to look into that under the fourth provision, right? The fifth one, fixed tenure of COD. Here COD means Court of Directors. So earlier, the most influential or the powerful persons who are among the COD, Court of Directors, they continue to hold the director position for a long period of time. In perpetuity, they used to hold the position. So the British Parliament thought that it is kind of, the concentration of power in the hands of a few people is not good, and it is against the interest of the British. So it thought that there has to be some mechanism, a kind of fixed period for the holding the Court of Director position. So it brought a 4-year tenure for the Court of Director. If a person elects as a Court of Director, he will be continuing as in that position for the next 4 years, and at the end of the 4th year, he will be retiring. And for the next term, there is a cooling period. And after completing the next cooling period for 4 years, he will be again elected, right? So there is no consecutive period of COD. That means if a person is there, he is elected as COD, so he will be continuing for 4-year period, and again there is a cooling period for 4 years, right? Again, there is a 4-year period. So this cooling period 4 years, he cannot contest as a COD, right? So the sixth point is establishment of the Supreme Court of Judicature at Calcutta. So a Supreme Court was established at Calcutta. So we are going to look into the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, the powers of the court, and what are the lacunae that were found in the establishment of Supreme Court. We are going to deal that. So now we are going to deal with the first provision. Before going into the details, first we have to know. So this was the change which was brought by the Regulating Act of 1773. So there were some organizational changes. There was changes brought in the organizational structure of the East India Company. So we have to know what is the organizational structure prior to 1773 Act. So what is the organizational structure of East India Company prior to 1773 Act? First we will be knowing that, and after that we will be looking at the changes that were brought through the 1773 Act. Just go through this PPT. Right. So the management of British East India Company. The management of British East India Company. So this is the period prior to 1773 Act. Prior to 1773 Act. So after knowing the structure that was prevalent prior to 1773 Act, we are going to delve into the changes that were brought through the 1773 Act. Got my point? So from the time period of 1609 especially till 1773, the core function was commercial activities. The core function was commercial activities. That means the East India Company's management or the structure, organizational structure, was mainly focused on commercial activities. Having said this, it is also important to note that from 1765 to 72, a kind of administrative functions were given to British East India Company, right? So because of the Diwani rights which were handed over to the British East India Company, a kind of administrative functions are also handed over to the British East India Company. So my point here is, although the administrative functions were given to the British East India Company during the period of dual administration, and after the abolition of dual administration of Bengal in 1772, the political functions were also under the ambit of East India Company, right? So even though during this period and after 1772, so the political functions were also under the auspices of East India Company, but the nature of East India Company, the organizational structure of East India Company was purely commercial in nature, purely commercial in nature. So during this period, there were no new positions were created, no new hierarchical structure was created. The old structure was used to manage both the things, that is commercial activities and political activities. Both were managed by the old structure only. There was no changes in the structural position prior to 1773. Although administrative functions were added during the dual administration, political functions were added after the abolishment of dual administration. Even though that, the British East India Company organizational structure was mainly focused on commercial functions only. Got my point? Right. So here, the decision making was at two levels. So the East India Company's decision making was at two levels. One is superior body in London, which is concerned with the policy decisions, right? So the subordinate body in India under the governor. So by this time, prior to 1773, there was no position of governor general, right? So there were three governors. One is for Bengal, one is for Bombay, and one is for Madras. So subordinate body in India under the governor. So here administrative decisions used to take. So the policy decisions which were the responsibility of the superior body in London, and the administrative decisions which were under the control of the governor in India, right? Clear? So the superior body in London. So here we need to know the court of proprietors and the court of directors. Court of proprietors are nothing but the collective body of the shareholders. It is the collective body of shareholders. This is known as court of proprietors. These court of proprietors annually elect 24 directors. 24 directors, they collectively known as COD, Court of Directors. So Court of Proprietors, who are nothing but the collective body of shareholders. Collective body of shareholders, they annually elect 24. They annually elect 24 COD, Court of Directors. Right? Here, the powerful and influential court of persons in the court of directors, they continue to exist. They continue to exist as a position. They continue to exist as the director of East India Company, right? So, because of such reason, because of that power concentration within few hands, the British Parliament has brought. Just now we have seen that there is a fixed term for the court of directors. We will be looking that. So, the collective body of shareholders is known as court of proprietors, right? And they elect annually 24 directors for managing the company's business, and this body is known as court of directors. So it is clear, court of proprietors, court of directors. Now court of directors, these court of directors are responsible for administration of the company. They appoint governors. They actually decide the policy of the East India Company, whether to pursue a kind of peace oriented or a kind of aggressive, right? So during such periods, at certain points of time, the East Indian Company did not involve in any wars because of the policy decision of the court of directors. And during such periods, and during some other periods, the East India Company actively involved in wars with the princely states because of the policy decision which was taken by the court of directors. So the court of directors decide the policy of the East India Company, right? Whereas the governor in India decides about the administrative decisions. So the court of directors, they had the superior authority to set, modify, or change the goals of the company. Right? Got my point? They had the authority to set, change, or modify the goals of the company. They also had the power to altogether suspend the trading activities altogether. So they had the power to suspend the trading activities altogether. So it is a very powerful body situated in London, right? It actually takes the policy decisions based on such policy decisions. The subordinate body has to act in India. The subordinate body in India is under the control of the governor, responsible for the administration of presidencies. So there were 3 presidencies: Bombay, Madras, and Bengal. Right. So these presidencies were independent. Yesterday also we have said that the independent nature of these presidencies became a problem during the first Anglo-Mysore War. The British Parliament has identified a kind of strategic lack of strategic coordination was identified, and to set that Regulating Act of 1773 was brought in. So what is the kind of changes that the British Parliament has made? We are going to look into that. So by this time, before 1773 Act, the 3 presidencies were independent to each other. They actually conducted the wars on their own. They concluded the treaties on their own, and at times the policies of one presidency are in conflict with the other presidency. So if Bengal pursued a policy, that may be in conflict with the Bombay policy, right? Bombay's policy may be in conflict with the Madras policy. So to avoid such kind of confusion, the British Parliament has brought Regulating Act of 1773, and several changes were made here. So we are going to look into the changes. So each of the other responsible to the court of directors. So they independent of each other, and they were directly responsible to the court of directors. So there was no kind of centralized authority established in India. There was no centralized authority established in India. This was a lacune, or this was a loophole that was identified by the British Parliament, and it created a centralized bureaucracy, centralized leadership in India. We will be looking at it. So these governors had limited powers because the original power was rested with the court of directors. So the governors had to act in accordance with the court of directors' decisions. So court of directors being the very powerful body that is situated in London, right? So here the Regulating Act in the superior body, at the superior body in London, which is situated in London. So no major structural changes were made in the superior body that is at London. So the major structural changes were made at the subordinate body through the 1773 Act. The changes that were happened at the subordinate body, but not at the superior body. The superior body was made, largely intact. largely intact, and there were only two changes that were made. But the 1773 Act more or less concerned with the subordinate body in India. So the all the provisions of what we call 1773 Act concerned more with the subordinate body, and only two major changes were made with respect to the superior body. Got my point? So first we will discuss the superior body, and then we will go to the subordinate body. Right here, the superior body. About the court of directors, there were two major changes were brought. The first one is court of directors were required. Earlier, there was no oversight mechanism. The parliament has brought parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. This oversight was defined. This oversight was defined in a way that the court of directors were required to send regular reports to the British Parliament on civil, military, and revenue functions. On civil, military, and revenue functions of the company, the court of directors were required to send regular reports to the British Parliament. You got my point? So earlier there was no mechanism of oversight. So the British Parliament, after having scrutiny over these reports, will change the administration. Will bring some new changes in the administration. So after going through these reports, if the British Parliament has found some lacunae or some limitations in the East India Company, it will bring some new changes. It will include some new changes in the upcoming legislations. So we will be looking at Charter Acts and Indian Council Acts, everything. So the Court of Directors now, earlier this was not the provision. Court of Directors were not required to send any reports prior to 1773. But in the 1773 Act, Court of Directors were required to submit reports on civil, military, and revenue functions of the company's administration in India. So regular reports have to be sent on civil matters, on military matters, on revenue matters to the British Parliament. Got my point? Right. So this is one major change. The second major change being the term of COD. Earlier I have said that the term of COD was restricted to 4 years. So if a person elected to the Court of Directors, he will be continuing in that position for 4 years, and after that 4 years there is a cooling period. For the next 4 years, he will not contest as a COD. He will not contest for the position of COD, and after that cooling period, he may contest and he may elect. Right. So the term of COD was fixed at 4 years, and out of 24 directors, 6 directors elected annually for a term of 4 years. So there were 24 COD, 24 members, right, in the COD, count of directors. Out of this, 1/4, that means 6 directors will be retained annually, and in their positions, 6 new directors. That means not even a single person from the retiring persons will be elected immediately. There must be a cooling period of 4 years, right? 6 new directors will be elected, right? So if a person is there, he is a COD, elected as a COD, so he will be continuing in this position for 4 years, and after this 4 years, there will be a cooling period of 4 years. Here he is a COD, here this is a cooling period, right? In this cooling period, he did not contest for the position of COD, Court of Director, and again, after completion of the cooling period, he may contest, and he may elect as a COD again. Got my point? So these are the new 2 new changes which were brought at the superior body in London. At the superior body in London, there were 2 major changes which were brought under the 1773 Act. Just go through the subordinate body in India. Right. So in the previous slide, we have seen that the core functions of the company was commercial in nature. Although an additional political functions, additional administrative functions were added to the company, even though the company continued its administrative structure based on the commercial nature. But now the core functions were bifurcated into commercial and political. Right? So the Regulating Act of 1773 recognized, this is very important, recognized the dual nature of the company. On one hand, it is commercial in nature. The functions of East India Company are commercial in nature. On the other hand, it also continued as a political body. So the dual nature of functions were recognized through the Regulating Act of 1773. Why I am stressing this recognized means 1773 Act recognized the commercial and political functions, whereas there will be another act we are going to encounter either in the today's class or tomorrow's class, that is 1784 Pitt's India Act. So it actually recognized, right? Here 1784 Act distinguished commercial and political functions. That means through 1773 Act, the British Parliament has recognized the dual nature, of the East India Company, that is the commercial and the political. However, in 1784 Pitt's India Act, the British Parliament has distinguished. That means even though the British Parliament has recognized the dual nature of the East India Company, still both the functions are being carried out under the auspices of Court of Directors. So there was no separate body was created in the 1773 Act to handle the political functions. This is my point here. So in 1773 Act, there was no body created. Have we seen here? No. Have we seen here? No. There were two major changes that were brought in Court of Directors itself. So there was no separate body that was created to handle the political functions, either the commercial functions or the political functions, still under the control of COD, Court of Directors, through the 1773 Act. So after that, the British Parliament has found it as a limitation. So it distinguished, it's bifurcated the functions into commercial functions and political functions. Commercial functions will be handed over to the COD, Court of Directors, and the political functions will be given to a new body that is created under 1784 Act, which is to be known as Board of Control. Board of Control. We are going to look into Board of Control, the membership of Board of Control, and the functions of Board of Control. So here my point is, through 1773 Act, the Act only recognized. It is not distinguished. There is no bifurcation of functions. It only recognizes that the core functions of the East India Company from now onwards will be twofold. One is commercial functions, the other is political functions. But still, the Court of Directors were given the authority over the two functions. That means commercial functions and the political functions will be continued under the control of Court of Directors. There was no separate body created in London. Whereas under 1784, there is a distinguishment. That means the commercial functions and the political functions were separated, right? Commercial functions were given to COD and political functions were given to BOC. So this was a potential MCQ, right? Here, earlier I have said that Regulating Act of 1773 made major structural changes at the subordinate body in India, and there were no major structural changes that were made in the superior body. Got my point? Only two changes were made in the body of Court of Directors. Right. Now we are going to look into what are such changes which were made in the subordinate body in India. Here, under the provisions of 1773 Act, a while from now, we have discussed that the nomenclature of Governor of Bengal was changed to Governor General of Bengal. Is this only the change in nomenclature, or any additional powers were given to this position of Governor General of Bengal? Yes, some powers were given to this position, and he was made a centralized figure in India, centralized figure in British India, in matters of war and diplomacy. So, under the provisions of the 1773 Act, the Governor of Bengal was made Governor General of Bengal. And he is going to be assisted with a council of 4 members. Got my point? So Governor of Bengal was transformed to Governor General of Bengal. So the newly added powers were throughout British India. If any war that is going to be waged, if any diplomatic treaty that is going to be signed, these two powers were under the control of Governor General of Bengal. Earlier, Governor of Bombay having his own war and diplomatic powers, whereas Governor of Bombay is also having his own war and diplomacy powers. But now onwards, from 1773 Act onwards, the war and diplomacy in matters of war and in matters of diplomacy, the Bombay and Madras presidencies were made subservient to the Bengal province. So the Governor General of Bengal being the centralized authority in matters of war and in matters of diplomacy. There is no way for a Madras governor to make a treaty with the neighboring power without the consent from the Governor General of Bengal. In a similar way, the Governor of Bombay has no power to wage a war on a neighboring power such as Marathas, right? So there was no chance for the Governor of Bombay to wage a war on Marathas without the consent from the Governor General of Bengal. So these were the changes, major changes that were brought in the subordinate body. One thing is, Governor of Bengal was transformed to Governor General of Bengal, and he was going to be assisted with a 4 members council. Earlier, a single individual, that means governor, was responsible for the administration of his province. But now a body was created, a collective decision making was created, right? To take important decisions, the Governor General has to obey the decisions of the council, executive council, right? And in matters of war and diplomacy, Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras were made subordinate provinces to the Governor General of Bengal. Got my point? Now, creation of the post of Governor General of Bengal. So here we have seen that in 1772, Warren Hastings, he was made the Governor of Bengal. Governor of Bengal. So he actually abolished dual administration in Bengal, right? And also brought Bengal province under direct control of the British. Direct control of the British East India Company. So these are the two major changes that Warren Hastings done in 1772, right? With the enactment of 1773 Act, Warren Hastings was made Governor General of Bengal. So from Governor of Bengal, his nomenclature was changed to Governor General of Bengal. So the first Governor General of Bengal was Warren Hastings. It is very important from the point of MCQs. So under the provisions of Regulating Act of 1773, who was made the first Governor General of Bengal? He was Warren Hastings, right? Warren Hastings was such person who was made as the first Governor General of Bengal. Got my point? With the enactment, a centralized leadership was established. So although the 1773 Act, through the 1773 Act, the centralization was focused only on war and diplomacy, only on matters of war, only on matters of diplomacy. The centralization was put in place. In other matters, in legal matters or in the internal autonomy, the Bombay and Madras presidencies were independent. So only in matters of war and only in matters of diplomacy, they were subordinate to the Bengal province, Governor General of Bengal, right? So it is a first step. So it is not the ultimate step or it is not the final step, but it is a first step towards centralized administration in India. Got my point? First step towards. The last step being the last step. That means the final step towards centralization in India means 1833 Charter Act. 1833 Charter Act. So through 1833 Charter Act, the legal powers, the law-making powers were also taken away from Bombay and Madras provinces, and they were handed over to the Governor General of India. So the nomenclature was changed through 1833 Charter Act. So in 1833 Charter Act, Governor General of Bengal was transformed to Governor General of India. So we'll be looking at that when we discuss this. For the time being, the 1773 Act was a first step towards centralization in India. Right. That means, for example, if you say there are right. So in the previous lecture, we have seen that during the first Anglo-Mysore War, which was conducted between 1667 to 69, during this period, Bengal, Bombay, and Madras, these three provinces acted on independent basis. They were actually independent, right? So the lack of coordination, the lack of strategic coordination among these three presidencies resulted in the defeat of East India Company. Yesterday we have seen this, right? So the change that was brought through the Regulating Act of 1773, that so in matters of war and in matters of diplomacy, that means treaties, Bombay and Madras must be subordinate to Bengal province. So it established a centralized structure. Centralized leadership was established here. So the governor of Bombay, governor of Madras must obey the orders from the Governor General of Bengal in matters of war and in matters of diplomacy. This is not the complete centralization. It is a part of the centralization process. But we can say that the first step towards centralization in India was through the 1773 Regulating Act. Got my point? The second feature we are going to discuss is establishment of Executive Council. So prior to 1773 Act, a single individual will take the decisions. He will be responsible for taking the decisions and implementing them. Although subordinate bureaucracy is there, but the important decisions, crucial decisions, will be taken by the single individual. That means governor of that particular province, governor of province. In case of Bengal, governor of Bengal. In case of Madras, governor of Madras. Like such, they will take important decisions, right? They will take the important decisions on a individual basis. So there is no kind of body that is created to discuss, right? To discuss and to take a particular decision. There was no such kind of body. But the Regulating Act of 1773 has created an executive council. So the purpose of the executive council is to have a deliberative body. So in the executive council, a particular decision is taken for discussion, and after having discussion, after having arguments, a particular decision will be taken. Right. So this executive council consisting of 4 members. So through the 1773 Act, a body of 4 members known as executive council was created. A body of 4 members was created, and it is known as executive council. So the council will be headed by the Governor General of Bengal. And Governor General and the council both together. That means Governor General plus Executive Council, both together known as Governor General in Council. So Governor General heads the Executive Council, and Governor General and Executive Council both together known as Governor General in Council. And this body, Governor General in Council, actually it created a form of collective responsibility. We can say that the earliest form of collective responsibility came in the form of Governor General in Council. Governor General in Council replicated the earliest form of collective responsibility. Today we are saying that collective responsibility. So Indian Parliament democracy is a testimony for the collective responsibility. So such kind of responsibility, collective responsibility, for the first time was established through the Governor General in Council. The first thing you must should know. And the second thing is the Governor General in Council. The Governor General in Council is a precursor, is a kind of precursor to the cabinet style of governance. Cabinet style of governance. So these are the important points that you should mention you are in mains answer writing, or they are important from the perspective of the prelims also. So Governor General in Council, the earliest form of collective responsibility was seen through Governor General in Council, right? So also the Governor General in Council, a kind of cabinet style of governance was established through Governor General in Council. Got my point? So we have seen the establishment of Executive Council and the functions of Executive Council. It was a deliberative body to discuss the decisions prior to taking the decisions. A discussion will be taken on in the Executive Council, and after coming to the consensus, a particular decision will be taken, which is different from the prior to 1773 Act. Prior to 1773 Act, a individual, that is the governor, will be taking all the important decisions without having any deliberation on that. So to avoid a kind of monopoly, to avoid a kind of autocracy, so the British Parliament introduced Executive Council of 4 members. Executive Council, in addition to the Governor General actually heads the Executive Council. So Governor General, including the Executive Council, is known as Governor General in Council. So this Governor General in Council is the earliest form of collective responsibility in India, and also it is a precursor to the cabinet style of governance in India. Got my point? So third one, parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. Parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. Right. So here, earlier we have seen that when we are discussing the changing nature of East India Company, which is the third major reason for the enactment of Regulating Act of 1773, we have seen that the power abused by the East India Company officials was mainly due to the lack of oversight from the British Parliament. So the British Parliament has identified this lacunae. So it wanted to fill this loophole by establishing a parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. So in what way actually the oversight was established? So this was for the first time we have said that from 1609, especially from 1609 till 1773, there was no interference or no oversight by the British Parliament in the internal affairs of the East India Company. There was no kind of interference, there was no kind of oversight from the British Parliament, right? So this was found as a loophole by the British Parliament. So it included a provision in the 1773 Act that British parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. In what way actually it was done? So now the Court of Directors, who are responsible for the administration of Indian territories, will be responsible for sending, or a regular reports will be required to send to the British Parliament on civil matters, on military matters, and revenue matters. On civil, military, and revenue matters, regular reports must have to be sent to the British Parliament for scrutiny. Right? For scrutiny, these reports have to be sent by the COD, Court of Directors, to the British Parliament. So if the British Parliament has found something inappropriate, it may take action on the Court of Directors. It may take action, right? So there is a kind of fear among the COD to pursue the functions in an appropriate way, without any kind of malpractices, without any kind of without any kind of abuse of power. So it has to carry its functions because there was an oversight from the Parliament. So this parliamentary oversight was instituted in the 1773 Act. So here, this move, that means parliamentary oversight. So the parliamentary oversight was not instituted for the betterment of the welfare of the Indian people. It is not for that reason. Okay, it is not for that reason, but for the alignment of British interests in line with for the alignment of company, that means East India Company interest in line with British interest. Got my point? So there is no kind of diversion of company's interest away from the British interest. So the company has to follow the policy of the British colonial state, right? So British colonialism. So the British policy must be taken up and must be followed by the company. So the company need not pursue its own policy. So to align the company policy in line with the British policy, such kind of oversight was established. Such kind of British parliamentary oversight was established only to align the company's priorities in line with the British priorities. So it is not to do any kind of justice to the people of India, to bring welfare activities to the people of India. It is not such kind of what do you call action. So whatever the oversight mechanism that was established, it was only to align company's interest in line with the British interest. Got my point? Right. The fourth one, fixing maximum annual dividend to the shareholders of the company. So here, so there is a limit on the. So if you say this is East India Company, and by pursuing some trading activities, it generated a profit. Right. Out of this profit, a portion will be given as a dividends to the shareholders. Right. But the company, the British Parliament has put a limit on this portion. That limit was 6%. 6% out of the profits, only 6% has to be given to the shareholders as a dividend, because earlier we have seen that in early 70s, the East India Company has sought a loan of £1 million. So £1 million was taken from the British Parliament. British government. British government has loaned an amount of £1 million to the East India Company. So the the British Parliament has put in place this kind of condition. That is, only 6% of the profits will be given to the shareholders as the dividends, because the rest of the amount, the company first has to clear the debt that is owed to the British Parliament or the British government. So the company first has to serve the loan that has been taken, and after finishing or after completing that loan, it is up to the East India Company. And there will be no 6% limit. So after completing the British government loan, after finishing the loan by the East India Company, the East India Company can increase this 6%. But until that time, the 6% will be there. Only 6% of the profits will be given to the East India Company shareholders. Got my point? Right. The fifth point being fixed tenure of court of directors. Right. So earlier we have seen that court of proprietors usually elect on an per annum basis. Every year the court of directors will be elected. But here the catch is that the powerful and influential persons will be elected continuously. There is no kind of fixed tenure for those persons. So the British Parliament has thought that this kind of monopoly over the decisions of the court of directors that has been in the hands of the few individuals. There are few powerful, influential persons in the court of directors. They are continuing as court of directors in perpetuity. On a permanent basis, they are continuing, and every year they are electing as a court of directors. Because of such a reason, the British Parliament has brought a new rule, that is the fixed tenure of court of directors. The court of directors will be elected annually. That means there were 24 COD. The COD is consisting of 24 directors, right? So the new rule that out of this 24 directors, 6 directors will retire per annum. Annually, 6 directors will be retiring, and in their place, 6 new directors will be elected. Got my point? 6 new directors will be elected. and those who are retiring are not allowed to participate in immediate election. Immediate election. That means those who are retiring on this particular year, they are not permitted to enter into the election immediately. So there must be a cooling period. Yesterday, just now I have said that if a person who is elected as a COD, he will be continuing for a 4-year period, and after that, there will be a 4-year period, that is cooling period, and after that, in the next election, not in the immediate election, but in the next election, he may contest and he may win the election also. He may become the COD, but not immediately. But after a cooling period of 4 years, he may contest again. That means there is a break. There is a break in the continuation of the COD position for giving equal representation to more number of people, and also to break the monopoly of power. The British Parliament has brought this kind of change. Got my point? So to prevent the concentration of power in the few hands, so only a handful of individuals are holding the COD position for a long period of time. So to prevent such kind of concentration of power, the British Parliament has brought such kind of change. Sixth one, establishment of Supreme Court of Judicature at Calcutta. Establishment of Supreme Court of Judicature at Calcutta. Now, Supreme Court was established at Calcutta, right? The composition was one CJ, one Chief Justice, plus 3 Peon judges. So the total strength was 4. Out of this 4, 1 will be CJ, Chief Justice, and the other 3 will be Peon judges, right? So the first CJ, very important from the perspective of MCQs. First Chief Justice of Supreme Court of Calcutta was Sir Elijah Impey. Sir Elijah Impey. So he was the person to hold the first CJ position of Supreme Court of Calcutta, right? The second point being, so what is the jurisdiction? What is the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court at Calcutta? So this is the major point here. So we need to know the jurisdiction. The lack of clarity in maintaining in defining the jurisdictional powers of the Supreme Court has led to the British Parliament has defined the jurisdiction in a separate act. So 1773 Act did not contain in a detailed manner the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So we are going to look into what are the loopholes or what are the lacunae in defining the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. So initially the 1773 Act maintained or contained that so jurisdiction of Calcutta includes civil, criminal, admiralty. Admiralty means the which is in related to the naval forces of British East India Company. Admiralty and ecclesiastical. So this is civil cases, criminal cases, admiralty, that means naval cases, ecclesiastically, that is related to the religion. So the Supreme Court of Calcutta will be having the jurisdiction over the 4 fronts: civil, criminal, admiralty, and ecclesiastical on British subjects in Bengal province. Got my point? So it is clearly mentioned that the Supreme Court of Calcutta will be having jurisdiction over the civil cases, over the criminal cases, over the admiralty cases, over the ecclesiastical cases on the British subjects living in Bengal province. Clear? But here the lacuna is it did not define Supreme Court's jurisdiction. It did not define Supreme Court's jurisdiction over Indian subjects of Bengal province, and also company servants. So the 1773 Act explicitly mentioned that jurisdiction of Supreme Court will be containing civil, criminal, admiralty, and ecclesiastical powers will be given to the Supreme Court on British subjects living in Bengal province. Up to this, it is clear, but it did not mention anything. It did not mention anything, or it left as undefined. So it did not define anything on the Indian subjects, whether on the Indian subjects the Supreme Court has power or not. So the Supreme Court's jurisdiction included Indian subjects or not. It is not defined. And also whether the Supreme Court has powers of jurisdiction over the company servants. So the persons who are working in the company, whether the Supreme Court has authority over them or not. These two things were not defined. These two things were not defined clearly in the Act. In the Act, it was mentioned explicitly about this, but on Indian subjects and on company servants, it was not mentioned. So because of these reasons, there was a continued tussle between Governor General of Bengal and the Chief Justice of Supreme Court. Chief Justice of Supreme Court interfered in the internal affairs of the East India Company, and it actually sued some company servants and punished company servants. Whereas the Governor General being a point of view that company servants are not under the coverage of jurisdictional power of the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court said that it was not mentioned in the Act. It was not mentioned in the Act. In the Act, it was mentioned that all the British subjects are under the purview of Supreme Court. So company servants are also coming under the purview of the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court is having the power to sue or to punish the company servants. So this was a bone of contention between Warren Hastings and Sir Elijah Mpe, the first CJ. So there was a bone of contention between these two persons. So because of lack of a clear demarcation of the jurisdictional power of the Supreme Court, so there was a tussle between the Supreme Court and the Governor General of Bengal. So because of these two reasons, because of the missing lack of clarity on these two things, so the Parliament has to brought Act of Settlement in 1781. There was another legislation which was brought by the British Parliament to define the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So the Parliament has brought Act of Settlement in 1781. Got my point? Right. So far we have completed 6 major salient features of 1773 Regulating Act, and there is a 7th feature, but I forgot to enlist them under this list. So this list contains only 6 salient features, but there is a 7th feature also. We have discussed multiple times about the 7th feature. So just I am mentioning here, and in detail discussion was already done during the reasons behind the enactment of the 1773 Act. So that provision is to curb corruption and private trade. To curb corruption and private trade among the company servants. Got my point? So we know that we have already discussed in a detailed manner that corruption and private trade especially during the period of dual administration in Bengal, starting from 1765 to 1772, the company officials involved in corrupt practices and also carried out their private trade, so which actually deteriorated, which actually eroded the company's portfolio, and company went onto the verge of bankruptcy. Because of such financial malpractices, the company sought a loan of £1 million from the British government. Right? We have seen all these things. So in order to reduce corruption and private trade, the 1773 Regulating Act also included a provision to curb corruption and private trade among the company officials. Right? So this was the need of the hour, because the company is facing financial problems because of the private trade that is carried out by the company officials. By this time, that is by the time of 1773, we have seen that in the year 1609, King James I has granted indefinite extension of exclusive rights to the East India Company, and which were actually changed to periodic revision only in 1793. So from 1609 till 1793, East India Company is having exclusive rights to trade with East Indies, including India. So in matters of India, so for to trade with India, no other private individual was allowed. Only the East India Company is allowed to practice trade with India as per the exclusive rights which were granted by Queen Elizabeth I and which were extended indefinitely by King James I. So by the time of 1773, or precisely 1765 to 1772, the period of dual administration in Bengal, during this period of time also, the individuals, or better to say the company officials, were not allowed to practice private trade. But because of the lack of oversight, the company officials carried out the private trade, which actually eroded the company's portfolio. So the company's trade diminished, declined, and the company officials actually enriched themselves. They actually got wealth, they actually became rich, but the company was facing the financial problems. This was the situation over there. So, having known this, the British Parliament has included a provision to curb corruption and private trade among the company officials. So, because of such reason, a provision was included in the 1773 Act. A provision was included in the 1773 Act to curb corruption and private trade among the company officials. This was the salient feature of 1773 Act. But there was a lacuna, or there was a limitation. There was a limitation in this particular salient feature. That is, although the 1773 Act has included a provision to curb corruption and private trade, but no strict measures were taken up. No strict measures were put in place. So there was a provision only. But there were no strict measures that were taken place. There was no strict measures that were put in place. So to curb corruption or private trade, there has to be strict measures that have to be incorporated. But 1773 Act, by placing only as a provision, it did not include any such strict measures. To curb corruption or private trade among the company officials. Got my point? Even next, we are going to look into 1784 Pitt's India Act. 1784 Pitt's India Act in the next lecture. Even this legislation also failed to include any such type of strict measures to curb corruption among the company officials, to curb private trade among the company officials, right? So, having known the problem, the British Parliament did not include any such type of strict measures to curb corruption among the company officials. Only in 1786, through the Supplementary Act of 1786, this particular legislation contained provisions to curb corruption among the company servants, right? Although the British Parliament has identified corruption as a major menace of the East India Company, the corruption has percolated in the company officials. But 1773 Act, by saying only there has to be measures that have to be taken to curb corruption and private trade among the company officials, but it did not include any such strict measures to put in place, right? So there were no strict measures that were taken place under the 1773 Act or under the 1784 Act also. Only in 1786, under the Supplementary Act of 1786, there were strict measures that were put in place. One such measure was after appointing a particular individual to a particular post, that particular person has to report his assets within 2 months. So whatever the assets that particular individual owns, right? So in his family name or under his individual name, whatever the assets that the particular person owns, so that information has to be communicated to the company, East India Company or the Court of Directors, right? So by doing so, the company is watching on the company officials after getting into the post. Are they becoming rich? Are they getting any new assets under their name? So even today's UPSC also, after clearing your prelims, you have to fill a DAF, detailed application form. There, the UPSC asks you about the properties that were in your name. So whatever the properties that were registered under your name, you have to mention them in the DAF, detailed application form. So such type of measure was included under the 1786 Supplementary Act. Right? Got my point? Right. So far we have completed. So far we have completed six important salient provisions of the East India Regulating Act of 1773. So the salient provisions of Regulating Act of 1773 were completed, and this is a conclusion to the salient provisions topic. So these are the statements which can be used in your answer writing. Just go through them. The Regulating Act of 1773 represented a transition from corporate anarchy to regulated administration. So the wording is so important because it is saying that there was a transition from corporate anarchy. We have seen that the East India Company having no expertise, no experience, no hierarchical structure. So it is having, it is lacking certain things to administer Bengal province. So it is the same thing is saying here. Prior to 1773 Act, the corporate entity, but now it is transformed to a regulated administration. That means some regulations were put in place through the Regulating Act of 1773. Under such theme, there was a transition from corporate anarchy towards regulated administration. The second point, it laid the foundation for the future relationship between the British Parliament and the Indian administration. So from 1600 or 1609 till 1773, the British Parliament was nowhere concerned about the Indian administration. So it left to the East India Company to administer. It left to the East India Company to administer Indian territories. So British Parliament in nowhere concerned about the administration of India. So now through the 1773 Act, it established the first direct British Parliament intervention or British Parliament oversight. Because of such reasons, so it is the starting step towards the future relationship between the British Parliament and the Indian administration. So the first step was established through the 1773 Act between the British Parliament and the Indian administration. Although imperfect and limited in execution, we will be looking at the limitations of the 1773 Act a while from now. Although imperfect and limited in execution, its significance lies in being the first step towards the centralized governance because of the establishment of the Governor General of Bengal, and because of the centralized nature in matters of war and diplomacy. So it was the first step towards centralized governance and judicial institutionalization in India. So judiciary as a separate institution was established through 1773 Act. Judiciary as a separate institution was established through 1773 Act. So the 1773 Act was very important for two reasons. One is for being the first step toward the centralized administration in India, and for institutionalization of judiciary in India. What my point? Right. So now we have completed the third section, the salient features. Now we are entering into the limitations of the Regulating Act of 1773. Limitations of the Regulating Act of 1773. Right. So the limitations were 7 in number. Just go through the titles. Governor General of Bengal, a toothless tiger. Why he was a toothless tiger? We will be discussing that. Governor General of Bengal, a toothless tiger. Control over other presidencies, Bombay and Madras. How the control over other presidents was faded. We will be discussing that. Legal ambiguity regarding the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. We have already discussed that. Right. So lack of effective parliamentary control. So we have said that 1773 Act was the first act to bring parliamentary oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. But such kind of oversight was also not effective. So lack of effective parliamentary control, ongoing conflicts between the company and its critics in Britain. So there was a kind of monopoly or exclusive rights were given to the East India Company, but the British population or the British citizens were arguing that till how long the exclusive rights will be given to the East India Company. So we want to trade with India, we want to trade with China on an individual basis. So open the gates of trade to us also. Don't give the exclusive rights to the East India Company on a perpetual basis, right? So there were ongoing conflicts between the company and its critics in Britain, unabated corruption and arbitrary rule. So the 1773 Act was brought mainly to tackle corruption among the company servants and private trade among the company servants. These are the two things which actually eroded the company's base, and the treasury of the company was declined. So the Regulating Act of 1773 was brought to put in place strict disciplinary measures to avoid corruption and private trade, but they were fall short and they were not successful. So we are going to look as a limitation. Complete disregard for the welfare of the Indian population. The British Parliament or the British East India Company never took seriously for the welfare of the Indian population. They only wanted profit motive. The East India Company is a profit motive, whereas the British Parliament being for the supremacy of the British interest. So it wanted the British interest must be aligned with the company interest, right? So because of such reasons, the the Indian population's welfare was left. So the first limitation being the Governor General of Bengal, a toothless tiger. In what way the Governor General of Bengal was made a toothless tiger? We are going to look into it. So here, Governor General of Bengal, Governor General of Bengal, he was assisted with 4 members, right? He is going to be assisted by a council of 4 members, right? That is known as Executive Council. Executive Council. So in the 1773 Act, no overriding powers. No overriding powers were given to Governor General. That means Governor General cannot override his council. So the decision has to be a consensus-based decision. And the Governor General having no overriding powers. No overriding powers. I'm stressing this because the Governor General must and should get a consensus from the council, and then only he can act upon. Such a kind of, in a political atmosphere where the rival parties, the princely states, they are asserting their power. Under such circumstances, if the Governor General has to get the nod of his Executive Council to wage a war or to conclude a treaty, it will be most difficult. So that was felt during the time of Warren Hastings. Warren Hastings felt so much. He was faced so problematic during his time period. There were many battles that were happening in India, and for every decision he has to depend on the council's consensus. So if from these 4 people, if three people say no, then Governor General cannot forward with the decision. So if the Governor General has taken any decision, and if the decision has been given to the Executive Council for deliberation, and if the Executive Council, out of the 4 members, if three members said no, then the decision will not be implemented. Got my point? So under such circumstances, in the kind of emergencies, war and diplomacy, if there has to be taken, if there is a requirement of immediate decisions, that is not possible under the 1773 Act. So Governor of Bengal was made Governor General of Bengal. So a newly added powers were given, but he was made a toothless tiger because of the Executive Council's consensus-based Executive Council. So the decision has to be consensus. There are no overriding powers, even in times of emergencies. Even during the times of emergencies, there were no overriding powers that were given to the Governor General. Because of such reason, Governor General was made a powerful entity, a powerful person in Indian administration, but he was a toothless tiger, right? Right. So all this was felt during the first Anglo-Maratha War. 1775 to 1782. So Warren Hastings felt a kind of what we call a frequent, swift decisions were not taken because of the Executive Council's consensus. So during the first Anglo-Maratha War, Warren Hastings felt that during the emergencies, there must be a provision for the Governor General to override his council. The Governor General must be given overriding powers. So this was felt, and this was included in the future legislations. But for the time being, for the 1773 Act, it was a major limitation. Because of this limitation, actually, during the first Anglo-Maratha War, the Britishers, the Bengal Governor General of Bengal, was not in a position to take swift decisions. Right? Got my point? So the second one is control over other presidencies. The other presidencies being Bombay and Madras. In what way the control over other presidencies was faded? So the 1773 Act instituted a kind of subordination of Bombay and Madras presidencies in matters of war and diplomacy. However, in practice, it was not that effective. In practice, it was not that effective. So right. So irrespective of the provision of subordination of Bombay and Madras presidencies in matters of war and diplomacy, the Bombay presidency pursued its own war agenda. So it pursued its own war agenda, and it concluded a treaty with the Marathas, without referring or without getting a nod from the Governor General of Bengal, without getting sanction from the Governor General of Bengal. The Governor of Bombay concluded a treaty with the Marathas. So during the first Anglo-Maratha War, there was no strategic coordination between, although it was on paper in the 1773 Act, but I'm talking about 1775. So even in 1773 Act, it was on paper, but in practice, the Bombay governor did not listen to the commands of the Governor General of Bengal, and he acted on his own, and he concluded a treaty with the Marathas, which led to this treaty led to the first Anglo-Maratha War. 1775 to 82. So the control of Governor General of Bengal on the other two provinces, that is on the other two presidencies, that is Bombay and Madras, in matters of war and diplomacy, was not effective. So although it is on paper, but in reality, the Bombay presidency or the Madras presidency, the governors of Bombay and Madras presidencies acted on their own in matters of war and diplomacy. So because of two things. One is consensus based decisions in the Governor General Council. So in the Executive Council, the decisions must be consensus based. That is one point. And the independent nature of Bombay and Madras, even after 1773 Act. The 1773 Act made Bombay and Madras subservient to the Bengal province in matters of war and diplomacy. But in reality, they acted independently. So the independent nature of Bombay and Madras presidencies, and also the consensus-based Executive Council decisions, these two halted major decisions of the Governor General of Bengal. So during the time period of Warren Hastings, he faced stiff competition from the Executive Council and from the Bombay and Madras presidencies. So these are the two reasons which made the Governor General of Bengal a toothless tiger. The third limitation being legal ambiguity regarding the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. We have discussed this just for brushing up. So earlier I have said that the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court was defined in the Act. In 1773 Act was it is going to be having jurisdiction over the civil cases, criminal cases, admiralty, and ecclesiastical. So on civil cases, on criminal cases, on admiralty cases, on religious related cases, ecclesiastical cases, the Supreme Court is going to be having its jurisdiction over British subjects, right? Over British subjects living in Bengal province. Got my point? So those British subjects who are living in Bengal province, on those populations, British populations, the Supreme Court is going to having civil, criminal, admiralty, and ecclesiastical jurisdictions. However, 1773 Act was silent on the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. On the jurisdiction of Supreme Court, on two things it was silent. On two things, they were the first one being over Indian subjects, over Indian population in Bengal province. So in Bengal province, who are the Indian population are there? So on them, whether the Supreme Court jurisdiction will be on or not. So Supreme Court having jurisdiction over the Indian subjects living in Bengal province or not. It is not explicitly mentioned in the Act, but the Supreme Court at times, included that as a jurisdictional matter, included Indian subjects in its jurisdiction, because it is not mentioned in the Act. So the Supreme Court assumed that it is also under its jurisdiction. So it is a major loophole in the Act, right? So the second one being over company servants. That means the company servants, while discharging their official duties, if there is an error or if there is a problem, if there is an issue, so that is being regarded as the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and those persons were punished by the Supreme Court. So the Governor General point of view that, so the company servants, although they were British citizens, although they were British subjects, they were discharging their official duties. While discharging their official duties, it is not correct to make them punishable, right? It is not correct to punish them because they are discharging their official duties. So the Governor General point of view that the British subjects, although the company servants are British subjects, they were immune from any legal charges while they are discharging their duties. So on these two issues, there was a disagreement. Between the Governor General and the Supreme Court. So to settle this, the British Parliament has enacted Act of Settlement in 1781. Got my point? So we have completed the third one also. The fourth one, lack of effective parliamentary control. So we have discussed in the salient provisions of the 1773 Act that for the first time, the British Parliament has instituted a kind of oversight. For the first time, British Parliament has instituted a kind of oversight from the British Parliament over the affairs of the East India Company. This is for the first time British Parliament has put in place some kind of oversight over the affairs of the East India Company. That means British parliamentary oversight. So we have seen that how this oversight is going to be worked. So this oversight is nothing but COD. Court of Directors were required to send regular reports on a regular basis. They have to send reports on civil, military, and revenue matters. So the Court of Directors have to send regular reports on civil matters, on military matters, on revenue matters. On these three different things, the Court of Directors have to send some reports to the British Parliament. Through that, after having scrutiny over those reports, the British Parliament may take a decision whether to punish the Court of Directors or whether to bring any changes in the administration. However, this was the scheme that was instituted in the 1773 Act. Under 1773 Act, this was included. But here, one lacuna is there. So, from the Court of Directors, for example, if we say civil reports, revenue reports, and also military reports were sent to the British Parliament, and British Parliament received them. Here the limitation was there was no mechanism or no body. There was no mechanism or no body which was created to scrutinize these reports. So although the 1773 Act put in place a kind of British Parliament oversight, and it mandated the Court of Directors to send regular reports on civil, military, and revenue matters, but after the Court of Directors sending those reports, there was no mechanism put in place in London or in British Parliament. There was no body or no mechanism to read or to scrutinize those reports. So having said that, you are asking Court of Directors to send regular reports, but there was no mechanism to read or scrutinize those reports. So it is a waste of efforts only, right? So actual or effective British parliamentary control, oversight over the affairs of the East India Company was not established under the 1773 Act. So this was a limitation which was covered or which was rectified under 1784 Pitt's India Act. 1774 Pitt's India Act. So 1774 Pitt's India Act established a separate body known as Board of Control. Board of Control. Now, whenever the COD, Court of Directors, sends certain reports on civil, revenue, and military matters, the Board of Control will scrutinize them. And they will take a decision accordingly. Right? So 1773 Act, the British parliamentary oversight over the over the East India Company affairs was half done. There was it is not completely done, and the effective nature of the British parliamentary oversight was not put in place through the 1773 Act. The lacune was, although the Court of Directors sent certain reports to the British Parliament, there was no mechanism or there was no body to scrutinize them. This lacune or this limitation was covered under 1784 Pitt's India Act by creating a body known as Board of Control. Right. So the next limitation, the fifth one, ongoing conflicts between the company and its critics in Britain. Right. Right. So I have said earlier, this is the time period of 1773, right? So from 1609 till 1793, the exclusive rights were with the East India Company. Even after 1793, also exclusive rights with the East India Company only till 1813 Charter Act. British East India Company is going to have exclusive rights, but the nature of exclusive rights from 1609 to 1793 was indefinite or perpetual based. We have discussed several times this one. So at this point of time, 1773, the exclusive rights are with the East India Company, and the population of Britain were Britain subjects or Britain individuals, Britain nationals. They were interested in Indian trade and China trade. So these nationals, British nationals, who were in the interest of trading with India or China, they were against the exclusive rights granted to the East India Company. So they were against the exclusive rights which were granted to the East India Company. So this is the body which is striving for the curtailment or ending the exclusive rights to the East India Company. Got my point? So this body is demanding opening the gates of trade to all the British nationals. So ending the exclusive rights which were granted to the East India Company was the main demand of the nationals, British citizens who were interested in participating Indian trade or China trade. Got my point? Right. They were pointing out financial mismanagement of East India Company, undue military expansion. So the main motive of East India Company must be commercial activity. These people arguing that why the East India Company is expanding its military base, it has to concentrate on the commercial activities, right? So why it is actually expanding its military base? Why it actually is spending so much of money on the military expansion? So they are arguing these things. The third argument was the private trade, the unabated private trade by the East India Company officials. So these are the arguments by the people who wanted to trade with India and China, but the exclusive rights are with the East India Company. So these people are arguing for the curtailment of the exclusive rights that were granted to the East India Company. So the 1773 Act did not put an end to these arguments. So the 1773 Act did not solve or did not put an end to these arguments by this body of people. So this is a section of people that is emerging day by day in Britain, and it is pressurizing the government to end the exclusive rights which were granted to the East India Company, which was done through 1813 Act. We will be looking at that. So the 1773 Act did not solve any of these issues. So this is a major limitation, right? The sixth one being unabated corruption and arbitrary rule. Unabated corruption and arbitrary rule. So here, the 1773 Act, the one of the main goals of the 1773 Act to curb corruption and to curb private trade by the company officials. So the private trade and corruption eroding the base of the company, and the company was on the verge of the bankruptcy because of because of the corruption and private trade of these officials. We have seen in a detailed manner in the previous lecture, right? So the company officials, the company officials, the East India Company officials exploited their positions, exploited their positions of power, and they became rich because of the corrupt practices, because of the private trade. But the 1773 Act did not put in place any such mechanism to avoid, to curtail the private trade by the company officials or the corrupt practices by the company officials. So these are the two major reasons which were factors for ending the, collapse of the dual administration in Bengal, or bringing the East India Company on the verge of the bankruptcy. So corruption and private trade, they are actually haunting the company since the days, since the dual administration. The period 1765 to 1772. Since these days, the private trade and corruption were most haunting things for the East India Company. But the 1773 Act did not put an end or did not solve the problem of corruption, ending the corruption or ending the private trade by the East India Company officials. So this is a major limitation for the East India Company. Major limitation of the 1773 Act. Right. The last one is complete disregard for the welfare of the Indian population. Complete disregard. So here we have seen in the yesterday lecture, in 1770 there was a Bengal famine. Bengal famine, which actually lost. In which actually 10 million deaths were occurred. So such a huge loss of humans, right? So, but the 1773 Act at nowhere mentioned about this, and at nowhere instituted certain provisions to tackle these type of situations in future. So whatever the thing happened is happened, right? But in future, if there is any famine that is affecting the Indian population, so the 1773 Act must and should include provisions for making precautionary measures or proactive measures to contain such kind of famines in Bengal or other parts of the Indian continent, right? So, but the 1773 Act did not talk anything about this, and it was silent on the welfare of the Indian population. The Act must and should contain a kind of famine relief measures, but the 1773 Act did not contain any kind of famine relief famine relief measures. So there were no measures to contain the famine effect. If in case, even after the promulgation, even after the enactment of the 1773 Act, if the Bengal province met with a famine, so there were no provisions or there were no corrective measures put in place through the 1773 Act. 1773 Act was brought. One of the major reasons was collapse of dual administration and the famine of 1770, which told around 10 million population. However, the British Parliament did not concern about the lives of the Indian population and did not include any single provision for the welfare of the Indian population. This was a major limitation which was in the 1773 Act, right? So this is the conclusion. We have completed the limitations. We have completed the salient features. We have completed the limitations, and the time is also it's already 80 minutes kind of thing. So this is the conclusion to present day lecture. So just now, right? So we have seen the limitations, right? To cover the limitations, the British Parliament has brought three different legislations, three different enactments. They are the Act of Settlement of 1781, the Pitt's India Act of 1784, and Supplementary Act of 1786. Supplementary Act of 1786. The major provision of 1781 to settle judicial to settle Supreme Court's jurisdiction. So there are certain limitations we found with respect to the Supreme Court jurisdiction. So to settle that, 1781 Act of Settlement was brought. Got my point? Right. So Pitt's India Act of 1784. Pitt's India Act of 1784 was brought to place, to put in place a mechanism to handle the political functions by creating board of control. Board of control was created to handle the political functions, and court of director was given only the commercial functions. 1773 only recognized the dual nature of the East India Company. That means 1773 Act recognized the dual nature, that means commercial functions and political functions, but it did not distinguish it. It did not separate it. But 1784 separated those functions, and commercial functions were given to the East India Company, court of directors, and political functions were given to a new body created, board of directors. Sorry, board of control, right? And also we have seen the parliamentary oversight was not effective because there was no body to scrutinize the reports which were sent by the court of directors. Court of directors were required to send certain reports to the British Parliament, but there was no body or mechanism to study those reports. That was also solved through Pitt's India Act, and those reports from now will be studied by the Board of Control, and corrective measures will be taken if anything found. If any wrong things are found in those reports, the Board of Director, the Board of Control will take the corrective measures. Right. So we are discussing in a snapshot for what purpose these three legislations were brought in: to settle the Supreme Court jurisdiction, to distinguish the dual nature of the East India Company. Board of Control was created, and Board of Control was also mandated to scrutinize the reports sent by the Court of Directors. And the Supplementary Act of 1786, we have seen the Governor General. First limitation is Governor General being a toothless tiger, so he has no overriding powers over his council. He has no overriding powers over his council, right? Though consensus-based decision making at the top level in India, it is dragging in times of emergencies such as wars and diplomacy. Wars and treaties. So the consensus has to be made for sure. There are no overriding powers for the Governor General of Bengal. So such overriding powers were given to the Governor General through 1786. That means overriding powers in times of emergencies. This was the need of the hour, which was felt by the Warren Hastings. He complained at multiple times to the Court of Directors to institute such kind of overriding powers to act in swift manner in times of emergencies such as wars. So this was done in 1786 Supplementary Act. 1786 Supplementary Act. This is the brief introduction for our next lecture. Right. So far we have completed lecture 1 and lecture 2. In lecture 1 we have seen the part 1 of Regulating Act of 1773, and in lecture 2 we have seen the part 2 of Regulating Act of 1773, and it is not possible for us to complete the whole thing in present day lecture because it is already running 90 minutes. So in the next lecture, that is part 3, we are going to cover all the 3 major legislations which were brought in place to counter the limitations of Regulating Act of 1773. So to cover the limitations of the Regulating Act of 1773, British Parliament has brought 3 legislations we have seen just now. That is we are going to cover in the next lecture. Thank you. Have a good day.